All right, so let's dive into something a little different this time, huh? We're stepping back in time to 19th century England for a deep dive into one of the most beloved novels of all time, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, an excellent choice. Pride and Prejudice is so much more than just a charming romance, you know?
Right, exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack today, the novel itself, to uncover some fascinating insights into the society, individual personalities, and, well, of course, the delicate dance of courtship in a world vastly different from our own.
Austen had this incredible ability to capture the nuances of social dynamics and human behavior. I mean, even as a modern reader, you can't help but get drawn into that world she creates.
Yeah, and one of the first things that jumps out at you is how marriage, is treated so openly as a business transaction. Mrs. Bennet's relentless pursuit of wealthy husbands for her daughters. It can seem a bit over the top sometimes, but there's a deeper reason for all that. Enthusiasm, let's call it.
It's easy to dismiss Mrs. Bennet as just a comedic character, right? Like she's just this silly, overbearing mother obsessed with marrying off her daughters.
Yeah.
But her anxiety, especially about the entailment of Longbourn, remember that? Well, it reflects a very real economic vulnerability that women faced back then in 19th century England. It wasn't just a plot device, it was their reality.
For women of that era, marriage wasn't just about finding love. It was often like a matter of economic survival even.
Exactly.
Remember that quote where Mrs. Bennet says, "If I can but see one of my daughters happily settled at Netherfield." She's talking about Bingley, of course, the wealthy Mr. Bingley. "And all the others equally well married, I shall have nothing to wish for." It's like she's laying out her financial plan right there in black and white.
And Austen cleverly highlights this by showing us the limited options women had if they didn't marry. Becoming a governess, like Lady Catherine mentions, was kind of a last resort, often a loss of social standing. Or relying on the charity of relatives. I mean, sure, it happened, but often it came with strings attached and could leave women in a really precarious position.
So when we see Mrs. Bennet, frantically trying to secure good marriages for her daughters, it's not just about her being obsessed with social climbing.
No.
It's about a mother trying to protect her children from a very uncertain future.
Absolutely. And this underlying economic reality adds this whole other layer of complexity to those central themes of the novel. Pride and prejudice.
You can really see how those two concepts, pride and prejudice, are so intertwined, shaping the characters' fates in these really fascinating ways.
It's almost like Austen sets up this intricate game of social chess, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is making moves, calculated moves, based on their social standing, their hopes for the future.
Okay, so Elizabeth, for example, she initially misjudges Darcy completely based on Wickham's accusations.
And Darcy, he's looking down on Elizabeth's family because of their social standing, all fueled by pride and prejudice.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
It leads to all these misunderstandings and missed opportunities.
Yeah.
And it even fuels some of the major conflict between characters. And what's interesting here is that Austen isn't just pointing fingers at individual flaws. She's using these characters to critique the whole rigid class structure of the time and that pressure cooker of social expectations,
It's like she's inviting us, the readers, to consider how these external pressures, can totally distort our perceptions of others.
Exactly. And ourselves. Sometimes we can't even see ourselves clearly because of these pressures.
Now, beyond the whole intricate dance of courtship and the social stuff, Pride and Prejudice also kind of offers up this really sharp critique of some of those sometimes absurd societal norms of the time.
Oh, totally. Like the whole idea of what makes an accomplished woman, for example. It's almost laughable.
Oh, yeah, those standards were ridiculous, completely over the top.
Yeah, remember that scene where Miss Bingley and Darcy are rattling off this list of, all the qualities an accomplished woman should possess? It's endless. A thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, the modern languages. I mean, come on.
And then to top it all off, she had to have a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice. It's insane.
Right.
You can't help but wonder if Austen's subtly mocking those ridiculous expectations.
Absolutely, she is. She's definitely poking fun at the pressure put on women to conform to these often completely arbitrary standards. And this satirical element is even more pronounced in characters like Mr. Collins.
Oh, Mr. Collins.
The way he proposes to Elizabeth. So pompous, so self-serving. It's a perfect example of how Austen uses humor to highlight the absurdity of some social conventions.
Oh, it's hilarious. I mean, he goes on and on about all the reasons why he would benefit from marrying Elizabeth.
Exactly.
And he's completely missing, that she finds him repulsive.
It's like he's reading from a how-to-propose manual without a single thought for her feelings or her perspective. Austen brilliantly uses these comedic situations to expose the hollowness of some of these social rituals, and it makes us, as readers, question their validity. And you know what? These critiques, while they might seem specific to 19th century England, they raise interesting questions for us today, too.
It makes you think, how often do we still find ourselves conforming to expectations, even if we don't agree with them?
All the time.
And how much of what we say and do is influenced by wanting to fit in or maintain a certain image?
Those are great questions to keep in mind as we go deeper into Pride and Prejudice. Austen, with her wit and her observations, she gives us so much to think about, even beyond the whole charming world of country dances and, elaborate courtship rituals.
So before we move on, I want to pause for a second just to ask you, the listener, what stood out to you in this first part? What resonated with you the most? What are your initial thoughts about this world Austen has created?
And we'll be back soon to delve deeper into the characters, those themes of change and growth, and Austen's brilliant use of irony and wit in the next part of our deep dive into Pride and Prejudice. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
We left off talking about how Austen uses humor to critique societal norms, especially around marriage, and what was expected of women.
And amidst all that satire and social commentary, remember, she also gives us these amazingly well-developed characters.
Oh, yeah.
Especially Elizabeth and Darcy. I mean, talk about personal growth. Their transformations throughout the story are just remarkable.
And they're so beautifully illustrated through specific events that happen in the novel. Like, take Darcy's intervention in Lydia's elopement with Wickham.
Oh, that's a great example. That whole situation with Lydia running off with Wickham was a huge EE scandal.
It could have ruined the Bennet family. Socially, I mean.
Yeah.
And especially Elizabeth.
For sure. I mean, running off with a man like Wickham, regardless of whether they were planning to marry or not, I mean, it was just completely unacceptable back then.
Right.
Serious social transgression,
Yeah. And for Darcy, who is so conscious of his social standing, it would have been really easy, understandable even, to just wash his hands of the whole messy situation.
Oh, absolutely. But instead he does something completely unexpected.
Right. He steps in and secretly ensures that Wickham marries Lydia.
Saving the Bennet family from complete social ruin.
It's incredible.
It really is. And this act shows a major shift in Darcy's character.
Yeah.
It shows he's not just bound by those shallow judgments of his class,
Right.
He acts with integrity and compassion. I mean, putting his own reputation at risk even.
And this quiet heroism of his, it completely changes Elizabeth's view of him. She's forced to confront her own prejudices, right?
Yeah.
To admit that she completely misjudged him.
Remember when she receives that letter from Darcy?
Oh, yeah.
Explaining everything and revealing, Wickham's true nature? I mean, the manipulative?
That's a pivotal moment for Elizabeth.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. A moment of real self-reflection.
Yeah.
She finally realizes that she was so swayed by Wickham's charm, by that, surface-level stuff,
Right.
and allowed her pride, those initial judgments, to completely cloud her judgment of Darcy.
It's like that saying, don't judge a book by its cover.
Exactly. And that's precisely the kind of introspection that Austen, inspires in her readers. She subtly makes us question our own judgments, to look beyond the surface.
That's a good point.
To be open to the fact that people can surprise us, that those initial impressions can be so misleading.
It makes you wonder, how much have we missed out on by, clinging to those preconceived notions?
All the time, probably.
It's like she's saying, look, don't be fooled by smooth talkers or appearances. True character, it's revealed through actions.
Exactly, through those choices that people make. And this brings us to another fascinating thing about Pride and Prejudice. Her use of wit and irony.
Oh, yeah.
We've already touched on how characters often say one thing but mean something totally different.
Especially the women, right?
Oh, yeah. Navigating those social situations with this, subtle, indirect communication. It was almost an art form. But Austen's humor, it goes way beyond just social maneuvering. I mean, it's woven into the entire narrative.
It's funny you say that because, for me, her humor, it's not just about, clever wordplay or making funny observations. It's almost like she's winking at us, the reader, sharing in the joke. Can you believe this?
It's such a great point.
You know what I mean?
It's like she's inviting us to see the absurdity of some of these situations along with her. And it adds this whole other layer of enjoyment to reading her work.
Totally. Like you can feel her intelligence and wit kind of shining through.
Her humor often serves as this subtle form of social commentary.
Right.
She's holding up this mirror to all the follies and the pretensions of the characters, and by extension, the whole society they live in.
Think about like Mr. Bennet. His dry, sarcastic remarks.
Yeah.
Always poking fun at Mrs. Bennet and, their neighbors.
Yeah.
Like when he tells Mrs. Bennet, "You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these last 20 years at least."
Classic Mr. Bennet.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, he's obviously using humor to, deflect, to deal with his wife.
Totally.
But at the same time, he's kind of subtly mocking that whole tendency to use nerves as a way to manipulate or get attention.
It's like Austen is pointing out these little societal quirks and these hypocrisies, it makes the characters feel so real, so relatable.
Even centuries later.
Right. I mean, who hasn't encountered a Mr. Bennet or a Mrs. Bennet in their own lives? We recognize those types of people instantly. And it's that blend of social commentary, character development, and sparkling wit that makes Pride and Prejudice such a masterpiece. It's so much more than just a romance.
It's a story that stays with you. It makes you think.
And it's full of those aha moments that make you want to, reread passages and just savor Austen's clever observations, her language.
So before we move on to the final part, I want to ask you, the listener, what aspects of Pride and Prejudice have stood out to you the most so far? Which characters have you connected with? What themes have resonated?
In our last part, we'll wrap up this deep dive by, connecting these timeless themes to our own lives and see how Austen's insights can still be so relevant to us today, even in the 21st century.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Pride and Prejudice. We've spent the last 2 parts really getting into the heart of this novel. The social dynamics, the pressures, the characters, and how Austen uses humor to make some really pointed observations about society, both then and now.
It's fascinating how Austen, writing over 200 years ago, managed to create something so timeless. We might not have entailment or country dances in the 21st century, right?
All right.
But those themes, those struggles with pride and prejudice, trying to figure out who you are in a world that's always telling you who you should be, it's all incredibly relevant.
It's like she understood human nature on such a deep level. I mean, think about how we form first impressions today. We're so quick to judge, whether it's based on appearances or social media profiles or someone's job title. We often jump to conclusions before getting the whole picture.
It's hard to avoid, isn't it? Our brains are wired to categorize things, to make sense of the world quickly. But that can also lead to some pretty big misunderstandings, right?
Exactly. Just like Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy, fueled by Wickham's lies, it completely prevented her from seeing who he truly was.
And Darcy's pride about his social standing, it blinded him to Elizabeth's intelligence and her spirit.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, how many amazing connections, how many opportunities we've missed out on because of our own biases.
It's a good question, isn't it? So what can we learn from Elizabeth and Darcy? I mean, how do we take those lessons and apply them to our own lives? Because Austen doesn't just point out the problem. It feels like she's offering a way forward, like a path to overcome those biases.
I think it starts with self-awareness, honestly, taking a step back and really questioning our own assumptions, trying to understand why we think the way we do about people and situations.
And being open to different perspectives. Recognizing that our initial impressions, they're not always right.
Exactly. And just like Elizabeth and Darcy grow throughout the story, right, they evolve, we can do that too. We can work on shedding those prejudices.
Becoming more empathetic.
More understanding. And challenging those deep-seated biases that might be holding us back from really connecting with people.
I love how Darcy, he proves through his actions that he's so much more than this proud, aloof aristocrat.
Yes. And Elizabeth, by challenging her own preconceived ideas, she discovers the real Darcy, that integrity beneath that, what might have seemed like an arrogant facade. They show us that growth often means facing those sometimes uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Which is never easy.
No, it's not, but it's so worth it. And it's possible for all of us. It takes humility, willingness to admit our mistakes, and, a little courage to challenge those biases head on.
And Pride and Prejudice, while it highlights those societal pressures, all those external forces, it also emphasizes individual choice, right? We
Yeah.
have agency.
Yes, we might be influenced by expectations and pressures, but ultimately we have the power to shape our own destinies.
Look at Charlotte Lucas, for example.
Mm,
She chooses a marriage of convenience with Mr. Collins, choosing financial security over romantic love. It might not have been the ideal situation, but it was her choice.
right. And then you have Elizabeth, who basically defies expectations by rejecting both Mr. Collins and Darcy's initial proposal. She's holding out for something real, for mutual respect, understanding, love.
In Austen, it's interesting. She doesn't judge either of them. She just presents their choices, those complexities, and leaves it up to us, the readers, to figure out how we feel about it.
And to think about our own values and our priorities. What would we do in those situations? It's what makes her writing so thought-provoking. It sparks those conversations that, can stay with you long after you finish the book.
And Pride and Prejudice really is so much more than a love story, right?
No, it's a story about human nature, societal expectations, and the complexities of relationships. And it's filled with wit, social commentary, and moments that make you just laugh out loud.
It really is a timeless masterpiece. And as we wrap up our deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought. In a world that often focuses so much on appearances and social status, how can we choose to see beyond the surface, like Elizabeth and Darcy did?
How can we connect with others on a deeper level, with empathy and understanding?
That's the challenge, isn't it? And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Pride and Prejudice. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep.